Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You are listening to part 2 of our look at Steptoe and Son, so if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, please do go back and listen to that first. It is a continuing conversation. We are going to be referring back to things, and we're also halfway through the episode that we're looking at, Series 3, Episode 4, Crossed Swords. And that's why we're going to go straight in to halfway through that episode, where our protagonists have gone to a very posh antique store, staffed by Derek Nimmo, no less, and they are going to try and shift their lovely bit of porcelain. So let's see how they get on.
So let's move on to the next act then, where they go to an antique shop to try and they want to sell the piece, don't they? And they go into the shop and there's a very posh Derek Nimmo as the antique dealer.
Well, before we can negotiate a price, I would have to be sure that you came by the piece legitimately.
He thinks he nicked it. Slosh him one.
No, right,
Punch his face in.
No, I promise
Kick
you.
him in the... Will you shut up for a moment?
He has every right to inquire.
There, you're too soft, that's your trouble. If that had happened to me in my day, it would have invited to kick up the Khyber at least.
This is brilliant acting from Harry H. Corbett, because he's caught between these two worlds. He's got his dad literally pulling on his jacket at one end, going, "Go on, you can get more than that." And then he's got Derek Nimmo, who is a bit of a prat, to be honest, but he represents that world that Harold aspires to. And there's a great bit of back and forth where he's literally. Do you know what it reminded me of? This might make you laugh. It reminded me of Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, where he's turning from one side to the other, and he's trying to have a very cultured conversation with the antique dealer, and he's turning around, he's like, "Shut up, Dad, shut up!" And it was very much like that scene in Lord of the Rings where he's having an argument with himself, Gollum. I don't know if that's an appropriate comparison, but it really
actually, you know what? I see a lot of Gollum in Wilford Bramble. Maybe it's just appearance, but there's definitely, and again, one of the real skills of Wilford Bramble is he can turn on a sixpence. Like, he will go from, "Oh, go me, oh, yeah, what are you doing like that?" Like, he will just turn like that. And again, making that work is a real skill. But yeah, here, I don't want to get too technical here, but generally speaking on this show, but there's a really brilliant moment in this scene in the antique show. And I want to mention it from a sort of filmmaking point of view.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that really is not appreciated, I guess, in sitcom is the director.
Yeah.
And here, the director is not credited. The director is Duncan Wood, who is credited as a producer, but he's not credited as a director. And I'm not exactly sure what the process is in terms of rehearsals. I know the writers are there in rehearsals. Yeah. I don't know if there's a director there kind of dealing with the actors.
Mm-hmm.
TV directors that time, it's more like, right, where the camera's looking, where am I putting things? So I'm not sure in terms of performance. But there's a scene here I want to point out, which is just a great bit of television. Basically, you got this, I assume, is a standard 3-camera setup. So, you know, you got a central master shot, and then you got a close-up from the right, close-up from the left.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a scene here where Derek Nimmo says, "I'll give you 200 quid for it." And they're so shocked it's such a large amount. They're like, "Oh my God, 200 quid.
200?
Yeah. And we cut from this sort of main shot to a close-up of Albert, who, and then because we've been this close-up, we get this contortion of like his shock at how much money it is, like 200, back to Derek Nimmo, then a close-up of Harold, same sort of thing.
I see.
Moving into those close-ups, it really creates that moment. And then immediately after that, they're arguing, Albert's like, "Oh, I'll take it, we'll take it." Harold drags him over to the side, and we get this shot right from the other side of them like in conference, like, "Oh, no, I want to get this, But you've still got Derek Nimmo just sort of potting around in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But it really creates this space within the set as well. And then the next shot is this very tight 2-shot of the two of them. Yeah. Harold is literally like gazing into the distance, thinking of money. And Albert's like looking up at him going, "Greed, it's greed, that's what it is." And it's just like that sequence. It's just beautifully filmed, and it's not just like stick a camera on, let's see what they're doing. They've made a deliberate choice of when to go in, when to move the characters, the blocking.
And would that have been done as live, or would that have been several takes edited together?
Oh no, it's all live.
Yeah,
and that's the trick of this live recording is the rehearsal, obviously. You need your cameramen to know where they're going so that you're in their radio just going, okay, move to a wide position. But also the actors need to hit their marks.
It's really interesting that, because I can appreciate that now you've told me, but it's not something that I am really conscious of when I'm watching. I don't have that sort of film background that you do. And bluntly, I'm not noticing that sort of thing, but it adds to the overall perception of the quality of the show. You know?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Without me actually noticing the joins, it's obviously the way. It's not just the way he acts it; it's the way the film was put together that creates that.
Yeah, it is. It's not conscious. I watched this the first time and didn't think anything. It was because I was sort of writing down detailed notes for this that I kind of really picked up on it. But yeah, I think it's a really beautiful bit of film work there. Hello listeners, it's Alan from the future here. I'm popping in here to say that scene I just talked about, it grabbed me so much that I had to do something more with it, and I didn't feel like I could fully explain it in a podcast format. So I've done a video on our YouTube channel which breaks it down a bit and really breaks down the camera movement and how they did it, and obviously it has the visual component as well. So do go and watch that. It's really quite interesting, and if you're interested in the filming process, and even if you're not, it may kind of show a different side to you that you don't usually think about. It could be interesting. So go to our YouTube channel. It's British Sitcom History. That's the name of the YouTube channel. Or search for Steptoe and Son scene analysis or something like that. You'll find it. Go and check that out. Okay, back to the show.
Can I highlight a couple of lovely bits of Harold dialogue? When he's talking to Derek Nimmo, he talks about the person who says, "We have brung it along in order that you may purport to have a butcher's at it." That's a beautiful line. You might know the film technical bits. I like the words. That is a beautiful bit of writing. And then he says later on, "Oh, I'm sorry about my father. He gets right on my bristles, he does." Brilliant. I mean, that would have been hilarious in 1964, but it's still funny.
And done with that posh accent, like he's trying to do it.
Yeah, he's really doing his best. Yeah.
Fall into the vernacular, yeah. It is great. And of course, Albert has no such pretensions.
Yeah, there's a bit of 1960s racism there, isn't there? Where he's talking about going for some lunch, and they're up west. It's all foreigners up here, except the poor devils what work for them. You know, so that's a little bit of social commentary for 1964.
Definitely a bit of xenophobia. And interesting that, you know, Harold picks him up on it. It's not a simple, like, oh yeah, he's like, Harold, they use it to create the conflict between the two of them. Yeah. But, you know, obviously we're coming off of a Brexit thing here at the moment, and it seemed so relevant. Like, you know, that's the sort of argument you would have with the older generation about some kind of sort of vague xenophobia that they have based on some half-truths and just their kind of limited observations. Yeah. It feels completely relevant even today. And that happens a lot. There's a lot of stuff in there with Albert being xenophobic, particularly. Occasionally goes straight into racism, but it's more about the other, you know, rather than any particular race.
And that goes back to this idea of Harold wanting to be part of a bigger world. And Albert's quite happy in his yard, where everyone is the other, and so therefore he's a lot more comfortable with that idea of xenophobia or homophobia. Whereas for Harold, those others represent the bigger world. He wants to be part of that world.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So let's go on to the last scene. So Derek Nimmo offers him £250, and Albert says he should take it, but Harold thinks, we can get more than that at auction. If he wants to pay $250, it must be worth a lot more than that. Yeah. So then we cut straight to an auction house. There's no sort of interstitial scene between it. We just go straight from that conversation to an auction. And this is a great bit of physical comedy. You know, we see all these posh people doing their exaggerated winks and ticks to bid on the
And you know what I was thinking, right? That whole concept of an eyebrow twitch to beard and how small it can be and stuff. I only know that from sitcoms. I don't know if that's like a realistic thing.
I've never
Certainly,
been to an auction.
I've never been to an auction, but any sort of auction stuff I've seen, I've watched Bargain Hunt and stuff like that. You've always got like a little paddle with a number on it, make a nice clear sign. This is me. I'm bidding. And that's what you want. You want to know who's bidding and
no
and
ambiguity.
When. Yeah. So
no humour to be derived from someone sneezing and accidentally bidding. That's not the real world. We don't want that. We want a clear
it's a classic sitcom trope, isn't it? That's. I don't know if that's realistic. Maybe it's an old-fashioned thing where it's like
maybe it's very... in an auction, you're going to have 20 or 30 lots. And each one, you're only going to have 2 or 3 people bidding for it. So perhaps at the start of the auction, they make a clear physical gesture. And then after that, the auctioneer is just glancing at those 2 or 3 people. And so, the nod and the wink has to be relatively small.
It reminds me of, I guess, have you ever been in a casino? Like people playing blackjack and stuff.
Yeah.
When they want another card, it's like, they can't just go, oh yeah, another one, please. It's like it means you know what you're doing if you're like that. It's like it makes you
exactly.
Like,
James Bond never shouts twist, does he?
The other thing I noticed about this scene, which is an odd thing, we have the classic auction setup where there's a guy going, okay, and 200 guineas, 250 guineas, okay, sold, bang the gavel, right?
Yeah.
We're immediately going, okay, we're in an auction and the guy sells something, we understand how it works. So then, little scene with Harold, and we cut back to, now it's their lot up. And it's a different auctioneer.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
It's a different actor. And the previous auctioneer is like sat behind him. And I don't know why you would bother doing that.
That's interesting.
Why?
I wonder if that's a thing in the real world where they can only do one. Like they have to hand, like football commentators, they have to hand over halfway because they're so knackered.
But even if it was, even if it
was real, then why bother get a second actor in?
Yeah, you're paying 2 actors there speaking lines. And I mean, I can only assume maybe it was a cut scene or something that was in the script for some reason. I don't know. I can't explain it, but it was just I noticed it, and I don't know what that is. If anybody knows, that'd be interesting. Yeah. The lot goes up, and it's not quite going high enough, so Harold decides to bid on it himself to kind of push the other bidders, and it's pretty obvious where that's going to go.
Yeah.
Basically, he's stuck with it. The other guy's not bidding, and he's going to accidentally buy his own thing. He gets rescued because someone else puts a bid on it. He's like, phew. Cut to back in the yard. You stupid old man. Why did you? But it's great because it means...
He gets to blame Albert.
He's made the mistake, but he gets to blame Albert. Yeah. Exactly. So the final coda to this episode is Harold is just frustrated and sick of it. So he's just like, I'm going to bed. He goes off up the stairs, there's a crash, and he comes down. Of course, Albert's dropped his priceless figurine, which of course he could still sell and make a profit on, even though he's lost money at the auction. And this is, again, classic Wilford Bramble. You can tell the difference when he's playing genuine sorrow and like he feels really bad about something, and when he's doing it to guilt trip Harold. And in this scene, he literally goes from one to the other.
I'm sorry, Harold. It wasn't my fault. I dropped it.
It's the only piece I ever had.
Got a bit dirty from all the handling it's been having. I thought I'd wash it for you and it slipped through my fingers. It's me arthritis and me knuckles. I can't hold things like I used to be able to. And Harold, now lose your temper. I'll get some glue, stick it together. We might still get a few bob for it.
They're both subtle. It's not like stupid cartoonish, but you can tell the difference. And I think that's a really important part of the character, because when he feels bad, you believe it. Yeah. And you see the guilt, you see the sorrow.
Yes.
One last thing I wanted to mention. At the end of this episode, Harold's chasing after him with a sword. Pretty comedy thing. But Albert runs back to the toilet and he's trapped in the toilet while Harold stabs swords through at him. And I love that. It's like we end to our beginning, he's trapped in the toilet again. Yeah. And that's nice writing, I think. I like that. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that.
And good physical comedy for the credits to roll over.
Yeah, exactly. You got like 45 seconds to deal with.
Yeah.
And again, Wilford Bramble just screaming for 40 seconds. It's great.
Well, shall we? I think we sort of wrung all the juice out of that episode. So shall we talk about? Shall we talk about kind of what happened afterwards to the stars and the writers and the production and so on?
Yeah, the later series, obviously there was a sort of a hiatus there, and Harry H. Corbett did a couple of shows. He did a show called Mr. H, which was written for him. It was a character called Harry H. And I haven't seen it. It doesn't survive. But it was, there's episodes written by Galton Simpson, some episodes written by Dick Clement and Ian LaFrennay, who we will be dealing with at some point in the future, no doubt.
Yep.
Great writers, but it didn't do anything and didn't do much. So ultimately, a few years down the line, it's just like, well, should we do Steptoe again then? Yeah, okay. So I guess that's what we're going to do. And Wilford Bramble, at one point, I think it was probably around this time, Series 4, he got a part in a Broadway musical called Kelly. And, a major part, went to New York and was going to do that. And so they weren't going to do another series, or they were talking about ways of reworking it without Albert in it. Which I don't think those plans got much further than the kind of drawing board. But the idea was to have, Albert dies and then Harold is at home on his own, and this young lad of 18 knocks on the door and is like, "Hello, I'm your son." Yeah. Which actually I think would be quite a nice concept, and then shifting Harold to the father character. I can see how that would work. But I don't think it ever got much past the planning stage, because the show that Wilford Bramble was in, which is called Kelly, is one of the most infamous flops of all time in Broadway history, and ran for one performance and closed down. So
really,
yeah.
So that put paid to his entire Broadway career.
Yeah, and he moved back to London and did Steptoe and Son, which is an interesting, how different things could work out.
Yeah,
if that had been, Starlight Express or something, Cats. But yeah, they both released records. Not officially in character.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, not officially, but yeah, basically singing about rag and bone men.
There's a beaten up Joanna gown for 7 and a tenner, and a candelabra goes for a bob. There's a roll of lovely velvet and a Kaiser's blinking helmet and a television. All you need's a knob. There's a stack of Dresden china and a model ocean liner and a pair of stays to fit your blinking grand. There's a rusty chested blender and a moffy giant panda on a rag and bone man.
And I think that was just a thing that happened at the time. Your popular artists would, and I think they were, reasonably popular as novelty records, I guess.
Yeah.
Then there's the second batch in the 70s. The show is remarkably consistent over such a long period of time. Mm-hmm. 12 years altogether it ran for. And it is high quality throughout. I think in those later episodes, it's just it feels like we're just trudging over the same material. There's certain plot outlines that are basically the same. Harold meets a girl and he's going to move out, and then Albert finds a way to stop him. Harold wants to go on holiday on his own. He can't. It's kind of you're seeing the same things. But yeah, it's still good. And in fact, those later series, perhaps because they got repeated more, are some of the more remembered ones. There's 2 episodes in Series 7 that went back to back called Divided They Stand and The Desperate Hours.
Yeah.
Both classic episodes, and possibly 2 of the most popular episodes in terms of the general fandom. And they're really different. So you've got Divided We Stand, which is a classic sort of sitcom setup, just this high concept. Harold's sick of Albert, so he partitions the house and he builds a wall down the house.
I know this one.
It's a classic. Yes. And it's been done a lot, sellotape down the floor and separating people. And it is a great episode, but it's a sitcom episode, and there's loads of physical comedy in it. And, with the TV, they've only got
the
half
argument
the TV.
Of the TV, yeah. And
it is a
Albert's
great
got
episode.
the knobs on his side, so he can change the channel.
It plays into all their character stuff, but it's plot-driven. And then you got The Desperate Hours, which is basically they're stuck at home. It's freezing cold. They haven't paid the bill, so the heating's gone off. And 2 convicts who have escaped from Wormwood Scrubs come along, and it's a mirror of them. It's Leonard Rossiter, who's playing the younger guy, and then this older guy with him, who's this burden on him, and he's trying to escape, but he's got to deal with him as well.
Yeah.
It's not played particularly subtly. It's a mirror between these 2 people. But a great concept again, but it's really dialogue driven. It's just about the talk. In fact, Leonard Rossiter and the other guy, J.G. Devlin, they don't turn up till about 12 minutes into the episode. The first bit is just Harold and Albert talking to each other and moaning about cold and stuff. And that's something we do a lot. In fact, you see a little bit in this episode we looked at where Harold is telling the story of how he got the piece, meeting the old...
Yeah.
And this is something they used a lot, where it's basically Harold monologuing, essentially. And you'll see with these bits of dialogue between them, it's 90% Harold.
Right.
And I think the writers picked up on the fact Wilford Bramble was not particularly strong at learning the lines. And it was...
So he was a drinker, right? He was an alcoholic.
Yes, and it was becoming increasingly a problem as they went later on. But you'll see, even in early episodes, because I say these are basically recorded as live, you will see him stumbling over lines quite a lot, much more than you're kind of used to seeing on TV. A little bit of life story of Wilford Bramble I like to touch upon, because there's a big scandal in his in his history.
Tell us about that. I know about this. Go on.
And it's an interesting story, and I think it sort of places it in its time. Well, first of all, Wilford Bramble was actually married at one point. Just after the war, he married a fellow actor, and they lived together for several years. And she got pregnant, and then it turned out that the father was their lodger,
right,
and not him. And so he immediately kind of left, and they got divorced, and he never saw her again, I think. And certainly that seemed to have a pretty massive emotional toll on him. But it also seems that after that point, he was exclusively homosexual in his relationships. Now, I can't speak for was he bisexual or was she a beard or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The point was, being homosexual was illegal at the time.
Yeah.
And at the height of his fame, after the first series of Steptoe and Son went out, he was very famous, obviously, suddenly overnight. And just as they were getting ready for the second series, he was arrested in a public toilet in Shepherd's Bush for, what's the phrase? Importuning, I think is the phrase.
Yeah.
But basically it means,
gross indecency.
Trying to get a bit of business in the public toilets from another gentleman. And now I looked into this. I don't know if you knew anything about this.
Yeah, a little bit. I was curious as to why this didn't ruin him. You know, firstly, it was against the law, but secondly, just in terms of his reputation.
And certainly, if you want to get a gauge of how homosexuality was perceived at the time, watch Steptoe and Son, because they touch on it a lot. And
there's quite a lot of homophobia in there.
And Albert Steptoe himself is very homophobic, and there is a sort of, knowing Wilford Bramble's history, there is a certain irony to that. In a retrospect, going, oh yeah, he was actually gay, and obviously it was secret at the time. But the fact that he was arrested for it must have been a known thing at the time. Mm-hmm. Surely viewers would have put it into that context. It's a strange thing to consider. But it's important to note that he strongly denied it. He was arrested and ultimately charged with this offence, and was given a kind of slap on the wrist, really, from what I could tell. He paid the court costs and was bound over for a year or whatever it is, stay out of trouble. And also, the press kind of gave him an easy ride of it. Didn't make a big headline news out of it.
And do we think that's just because he was a beloved person? They didn't want to ruin him?
Definitely part of it. When you hear the explanation of what actually happened, it's not like, they walked in on him with his trousers down with another fella in the cubicle. What happened was they had undercover police knocking around these toilets because it was a common thing.
Yeah.
And he came in and basically looked him up and down, gave him the eye, little bit of at best a bit of a suggestive nod or something, and they went, right, you're nicked, mate. And that's what came up in court. It's like nothing happened, and his defence was, I was going to the toilet. And
so
they said you went to
public opinion, he could get away with it. He could not be guilty.
I mean, like, from the police evidence, he went to the toilet, yes, 4 times in 20 minutes and spent a long time in there and was looking at people. And I'm sure he was up to something, I don't think... And it's easy to say that in retrospect, knowing he's gay, sort of going, oh, well, of course he was up to that. But who knows?
We're talking about in the context of the time. I'm trying not to say anything too controversial, but in 1962, people would have thought that was disgusting.
Yeah.
But they wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. They wanted to believe that the police had stitched him up because they liked him.
Yeah, and it's because he was famous. They were like, oh, yeah, we'll have him because he's well known. And so there was a certain level of plausible deniability, I suppose. And I think the press gave him the benefit of the doubt on the basis that they could tell the police would, not exactly entrapment, but certainly went for him. They were.
There was a move in the 50s, I suppose, the early 60s, where the police went out of their way to try and catch people. I think until then it had been it was against the law, but it wasn't really a big deal. They just sort of live and let live. I'm not really sure why, but after the war there was a definite move to try and entrap people is probably the wrong word legally, but to try and arrest more people. But this was also 1962 was after the Wolfenden Report. So the Wolfenden Report was in 1957, and this was where a parliamentary inquiry into this. It was the title was A Report on Homosexual Offences and Prostitution. There you go. Right. And that report had recommended that homosexuality should be legalised between consenting adults. But that was 1957, but it didn't actually come into law. The law wasn't changed until 1967.
Yeah.
So, 1957 was a Tory government. Macmillan didn't want to go anywhere near it. And it really took the Labour government coming in the late 60s to it was a great reforming government. That Roy Jenkins was the Home Secretary. They changed abortion rights and made divorce easier, and censorship in the West End was changed. And this was just part of that. It was a great reforming government, really. But I looked. So there's a 1965. So this is before legalization. There was an opinion poll, and 63% of people said that homosexuality shouldn't be a crime, but 93% said that homosexual men were in need of medical or psychiatric treatment. So whilst there was a move in the 60s to say, okay, people don't need to be thrown in prison for this anymore, it was still seen as wrong, as an aberration. I lifted some quotes here from the parliamentary debate on the actual act. So this is when it was legalised, 1967. And, you've got the Earl of Dudley, who was talking against it, said, homosexuals are the most disgusting people in the world. Prison is much too good a place for them. So that was the case against. But clearly it was okay for someone to say that in the House of Lords.
Yeah.
Roy Jenkins, who was obviously advocating for the law to change, said, those who suffer from this disability carry a great weight of shame all their lives. Mm. So, yes, the law was changed. Yes, people stopped being sent to prison. But clearly the taboo was still very much there for quite a long time.
What I was reading about it, it seemed to suggest, because basically he went from court to rehearsals for Steptoe. So, it was, the second series was about to go out. And certainly from what I read, it implied that he went out to record this episode. And as he walked onto stage, if the crowd cheered, it was going to be all right. And if they sort of jeered and heckled him, his career was over. Yeah. That's like how the BBC were looking at it. Like, can we ride this, or do we have to shove him off? Mm-hmm. And the crowd cheered, and that was fine. But he was at the height of his popularity. Like, this was just after series 1, and I think that helped. I think that makes a big difference. But it's also the reason they went after him. If he wasn't famous, they might have just gone, "Oh, he's just an old fella, let him go." He used to travel to Hong Kong, which apparently in the time, the 70s, the choice destination for particularly sort of older homosexual men, because there's lots of young boys around there, and it was culturally just a bit more okay. I don't know if it was strictly legal, but it was certainly kind of just let go. And at some point, he got some young Malayan man back with him and had him living in his flat. Certainly to public, it was his valet.
Right.
But lived with him for 20 years until he died, I think. So that seemed to be a situation that worked for him.
But let's talk about how his alcoholism affected his ability to do his job, and how that affected the relationship between him and Harry H. Corbett.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically where they ended up after the series finished. The series finished in 1974. It was Christmas special in 1974. But they did end up going on a tour of Australia in 1977. Mm-hmm. And it does feel like in the story of Steptoe and Son, this is like the lowest ebb.
Yeah.
From what I understand, it was like a 45-minute show. It was much more kind of music hall, kind of variety stuff. And it was like breaking the fourth wall. So it was, Harold would come out and go, "Oh, hey, I've left Albert. I've come to Australia to be an actor or entertainer or something." And then, of course, Albert turns up like, "Where have you been?" And so they have to deal with each other. And it's like, it's gags. I've heard a recording of at least some of it, and he's like, Harold Steptoe going, "Oh, here, you'll have to hear this one here, right?" So a bloke walks into a bar, it's kind of like that sort of thing.
So would Galton and Simpson have been involved in that then?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't think so, because I haven't seen it said anywhere that they wrote it, so I suspect not.
Okay.
And they end up doing like a knees up and a sing song with the audience and stuff. But it sounds like these guys were traveling around Australia for a year, doing 8 shows a week and touring and traveling all the time. a crap show that they weren't really like, happy about. Wilford Bramble was just an outrageous alcoholic by this point. Yeah. And I think Harry H. Corbett was just sick of it all. I think that's the sense I get from things you read about Harry H. Corbett in his late career, is frustration.
Yeah.
He'd been typecast and he just couldn't get away from it.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. It's sad. I think Wilford Bramble was less bothered by that. I think he would happily have traded on that for however long he could last. But the drinking meant that he wasn't professional. He wasn't reliable. Yeah, or just not turn up. Or turn up drunk and stuff. Yeah. There's a documentary that was made in 2002 called When Steptoe Met Son, and that kind of looks at all that in detail. And certainly in the sort of the world of Steptoe and Son fandom, it's considered that there's truth there, but they've taken all these negative aspects and made that the story. Yeah. And because there's talk as if they never liked each other or they always hated each other. And it definitely seems like they did not have anything in common at all, the two actors. They had totally different lifestyles and they did not hang out. But that does not mean they hated each other. And they have very different acting styles, which occasionally caused a little bit of conflict, but nothing too serious, as far as I can tell. Certainly the way Galton Simpson, for example, tell it. And perhaps on this tour in Australia, where they were both a little bit kind of lower and they were just stuck with each other for longer.
Just living together as well.
Yeah, tour tensions. That's to be expected, really. So I don't know if there's any... This documentary talks as if they kind of completely hated each other. I don't know quite how true that is. But I suspect Harry Corbett was completely sick of Wilford Bramble, certainly. Yeah. And then there was a dramatisation in 2008 with Jason Isaacs and Phil Davis called The Curse of Steptoe.
I've seen that. I remember that, yeah.
Which basically takes that idea and ramps it up to like the extreme. And I believe that the writer who's done that, The Curse of Steptoe, has probably taken all these elements of truth, but then just totally focused on one side of it. Yeah. And I'm sure there was little arguments and stuff. But it doesn't feel like an accurate representation of these two people. Certainly, like the Wilford Bramble character in that, played by Phil Davis, is just morose all the time, like never smiles. But Wilford Bramble, he was kind of a small, lonely man from what I can tell. But when he was drunk, he was an exuberant drunk.
He was the life and soul.
Yeah, to whether you liked it or not.
Yeah, to a fault.
Yeah. Certainly in the world of Steptoe and Son fan circles, those things are not particularly well appreciated. And Harry H. Corbett's family made a lot of complaints. In fact, The Curse of Steptoe, it seemed to change the BBC's policy on representing real people.
Oh, I see.
They had such problems with it. They sort of put out an edited version, and then they stopped it from being released on DVD and changed their internal policies about it, kind of as a backlash to that. But this was in 2008. It was kind of at the time where BBC was going through this whole thing. I think the whole like phone-in things that had been fake and scam and stuff like that. It was like that period. And they were being really paranoid. Tight on like everything has to be true and honest and real, But yeah, those are the kind of the legacy of Steptoe.
What about the legacy of the show? You mentioned earlier Sanford and Son, so we can talk a little bit about that, which was the American version.
Yeah.
But then let's also talk about how you think it's influenced other sitcoms.
Well, Sanford and Son was made in the early 70s, 71, 72 to about 75, I think. It ran for about 5 years. And it's a straightforward remake, really. It's a father and son scrap dealers. They have a van, like this old beat-up truck, right, rather than a horse and cart. But it's the same principle, they're really working class. They're black as well, which in America, of course, means working class. I
think that's the class system doesn't quite translate to America, so it's easier to analog it to race, isn't it?
Yeah. I watched an episode of it. I watched the first episode.
Well, I watched it as well. You sent me a link to it, and I watched it as well. And I was fascinated that it was more or less a shot-for-shot remake of Cross Sword, of the episode that we've been talking about.
Now, I picked to do Cross Swords before I realised that, but it does make for a nice comparison.
Yeah, no, it was great. So, but what was interesting to me was two things. Number one, it was a straight copy. But number two, why pick that particular episode? Why not the pilot if you're going to do a...
Well, it does have aspects of the pilot in the sense of, set up the characters. But then that means that they have to get the Cross Swords plot into a tighter time frame.
Yeah.
And it really loses a lot of pace because of it.
But it takes the same, it goes to the same, you have the antique dealer, then you have the auction in just the same way. Yeah. But yeah, it felt like a lesser copy. I don't know if that's just prejudice, like, you know, the British ones are better than the original. But yes, it didn't feel as good.
Where did you get this?
What's it to you?
Why do you ask?
Well, you think we thieves? Think we stole it? Give him one, Lamont. Give him one across his lips.
Now look, you don't have to worry. You see, I purchased that item from a woman in Hollywood, and if you want her address, I'll be glad to give it to you.
Well, I wouldn't. I'd be glad to give him one across his lips.
I think there's two major differences. If the things we say are really great about Steptoe and Son are the writing and the performers, the writing, obviously it's the same. They've taken the script, but it's not the same. And Galton and Simpson often talk about the very precise nature of their writing. And this has taken the general gist of the dialogue and changed it.
Yeah.
They've retooled it for American language, but also they've had to shorten it, or it's just not coming. But, you know, there's those specific... I mean, you were giving me lines earlier from Harold, like the way he's speaking, you know, those words are perfectly crafted for a reason, you know, and this is what Galton and Simpson did. They honed every word.
Right.
And that's just lost here, and so it loses the pacing of it. I think that Red Fox, who plays Sanford, the older Sanford, who's, you know, he was a famous comedian, and then he's famous for this as well. He's not good. He's just... It's all one note. It's all at the same level. And where we're talking about Wilford Bramble's just going up and down all over the place.
Yeah, he's just a grumpy old man, but that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And even, like, I prefer the younger guy here, Damon Wilson, I think he's called.
I don't know him. I didn't recognise his name. I didn't recognise his face. I don't know him from anything else.
Yeah, I think he's known for this. And it's worth knowing, like, Sanford and Son is not played in Britain. It's not a known thing over here, but it's a big American show.
Yeah.
So this is the first I'd seen of it. But yeah, it just lacks care. Like you know how in the episode we watched, Harold is like on the statue, and he's like, oh my God, like don't touch it, and then like he's delicately kind of around it. There's a couple of times where the Sanford Son character, he's looking at the bottom of the thing to see the marks on the statue, and he just like bangs it on the table, like just in the kind of live. He's not meaning to do it, but like it just taps on the table. It's like, you're supposed to be handling this delicately, and that's the difference in terms of performance. Yeah. In that the character is like, oh, I barely even dare touch this, as opposed to just get up, look at the bottom, and say the lines.
Yeah.
Little details like that.
Interesting.
And I did also watch. I just picked a random episode from later on in the series to see how it developed.
So I was going to ask, you know, like with like The Office is the one that's off-quoted more recently, where they translated it to America, and they might have taken some of the elements initially, but then they went off and did their own thing. So with Sanford and Son, that's clearly a remake of that episode. Is that a one-off?
Yes.
Or did they just write their own stuff after that, or did they crib other episodes of Steptoe?
They remade, or to some extent, 13 episodes, I think, which was probably the first run. And then after that, kind of went off on their own thing and brought in lots of ancillary characters.
Right.
So, you know, Sanford has a couple of drinking buddies who comes along. His sister-in-law is a regular character, and she's a pain in the arse. You know, all that sort of thing. And I randomly picked an episode from like series 6 or something. It was like one of the later ones. I thought, let's see what happened to it. And it was poor. It was really poor. They really focus on the older Sanford as the central character, and the son is basically just there as a foil.
Okay.
So,
but that's because Red Fox was the comedian, that he was the popular one, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But he's still not playing anything with any great skill. And certainly in the episode I watched, he was reading from cue cards, and not subtly at all, like not even looking anywhere near the other characters. He was just like, like it doesn't even feel like they'd thought about where the cue cards should be put. So, yeah, and it looks poor. And I can't judge too much. I just watched a random episode, but yeah, did not look good. Yeah. I read, I didn't see any of this, but I read that in later series that they introduced a character played by Pat Morita, called R-Chew.
Oh, God.
So I think I should probably give you some indication of the level they were working at. So there you go.
So what about other legacy of Steptoe and Son on British sitcoms?
Well, it's had a big impact, and I think you look at things now, and certainly you don't see the level of pathos as we've talked about, and the level of emotion, but you will often have sitcoms which will have an episode where they really focus in on some emotional character thing, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's the best episode. Yeah. Certainly in terms of more direct influence, John Sullivan has cited this as an influence for Only Fools and Horses.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see a lot of that in terms of working class kind of like scrapping together to try and make a living. The younger one aspiring for more, he's got his art GCE, he wants to get away and do better, but he's kind of held back. Definitely a lot of connections there, and you'll see it in occasional plot lines as well, like where it's like, oh, that's basically the plot from Steptoe and Son, but completely retooled and reworked. And I want to do a kind of little sidebar here. About Beryl Virtue. I don't know if the name Beryl Virtue means anything to you.
The name is familiar, but you're going to have to tell me a lot more. I can't.
Yeah, it's a name you probably see on the end credits of things a lot. She was a friend, a childhood friend of Alan Simpson. Like, she went to school with him. So Galton and Simpson in the late 50s, they set up a kind of co-op agency called Associated London Scripts with Spike Milligan and Eric Sykes. It was just like, right, let's all kind of work together. We hire an office together, but it just meant they could share the resources. And so when they set up this agency, they needed a secretary, and so they contacted her and said, come and do this job for us, which eventually she did. So she was, typing up the scripts they've written and that sort of thing. Then at some point they needed to discuss a new contract with the BBC, and so they were like, Beryl, call the BBC and negotiate as a contract. So she was like, well, I don't know how to do that. Did it. And then kind of over a short period of time became the de facto agent for these guys.
Right, great.
And, other writers joined them. Johnny Spate became a writer for them and other John Antrobus, I think. So she became an agent, basically, and then just became a very powerful and successful agent. Yeah. And eventually sort of segued that into being a producer because she spearheaded the concept of selling British sitcoms to America, but not in the sense of like Till Death Us Do Part can't play over in America because you can't understand what they're saying. Sure. But in terms of here's the concept, buy the concept. And so you got Sanford and Son and so many remakes of it in America of stuff from the 60s and 70s in Britain. It's something we'll be dealing with again and again, I'm sure. But through that, she kind of ended up being a producer, and you'll see her name a lot on all sorts of stuff. She ended up creating her own production company called Hartswood Films, I think. They did things like Men Behaving Badly was a particularly big hit in the 90s, and lots of stuff. You'll see them all over the place. And in fact, she's actually one of the few people we're going to talk about today who is still alive as of recording. I think she's about 90. I just wanted to highlight her because she is actually a real major player in the world of British sitcom and its success, and the fact that you've got people like Galton Simpson making really good money. Steptoe and Son has been made in not just in America, but also there's a Scandinavian version, there's a Dutch version, there's a South African version. Right. I think they've made a lot of money off it, like as the writers, they're the ones getting the residuals for all that. So yeah, in terms of influence, you don't see a lot of things like Steptoe and Son anymore. So in terms of a legacy in that sense, an influence in that sense, it's more been converted, into more sitcom-y processes. But you will get those episodes. Like an obvious episode that jumps to mind for me is Red Dwarf Marooned, which is a bit of a classic Red Dwarf episode. I know the one,
yeah. So whether there's just Rimmer and Lister, and it's a bit of a bottle episode where he ends up burning his guitar. I remember it well.
That's it, yeah. And that always reminds me. So, and that's one of the best remembered episodes because when they really get into character and you really get to play with these characters, and it's not just dealing with some silly plot.
And there's that pathos there as well.
Yeah,
it's not just gags. It's their relationship changes, and there's a lot of sadness. There's reminiscence. Yeah, I think it's a good comparison.
And I think you see that a lot in a lot of sitcoms where they'll do the bottle episode, and it's like they're really focusing. Like Porridge did an episode that it's called A Night In, is it? Or something like that. But it's just the two of them in their cell. And, Porridge is, those two main characters, their plot always revolves around them, but there's lots of ancillary characters. And that episode was just the two of them talking. I think that's a direct influence, whereas Steptoe and Son did that all the time. Even if they didn't do a full... That would be like the first 10 minutes of an episode before you do a bit of plot. And that's really impressive, but it must be so difficult to write that stuff.
Very much so.
So, yeah, in terms of kind of what happened next, you got Galton Simpson they're known for Hancock and Steptoe and Son. They never really did. They did do other things, but certainly not remembered in the same sense. Alan Simpson actually retired in 1978 and stopped writing. He was still, fairly young at the time. I got the impression just from kind of half-said things in interviews, he had some personal things going on in his personal life, and he just sort of went like, you know what, I don't need the pressure of writing and creating. So he retired, and like I said, I think he did like the after-dinner speaker tour. He's the talker of the two. Mm-hmm. Ray Galton continued writing and worked with other writers a lot, but never had the same success.
So Galton and Simpson still alive, did you say?
No, they both died only in the last couple of years. So 2018, 2017, I think they went off. But apparently were friends to the end, lived quite close to each other, saw each other all the time, which is nice. It's nice to know that.
It's nice to hear that sort of story.
Yeah, and there is another direct legacy of the Steptoe story. There was a stage play, called Murder at Oil Drum Lane. Now, this was written it was put on in 2005. Uh-huh. And it was an official thing. It was written by Ray Galton and John Antrobus, who was writing with it at the time, with Alan Simpson's blessing. He didn't get involved in the writing, but he was happy that they went ahead with it. And it was one of those things where it was like, they came up with a concept and like, do I want to revisit that? And okay, well, here's a good idea to do it. And the play, it toured. It had some success as far as I can tell. Now, I've read a bit of a plot synopsis of it, and it's quite a nice setup. So it's set in the present day, as in 2005.
Yeah.
And Harold turns up at the old house, an old man now, and there's a woman there from the National Trust, because the building it's been kept as the old rag and bone yard as a National Trust property of this old profession. And so he goes there to visit, and she doesn't know who he is, and so she's just telling the history. And then Albert's around there. He's haunting the place. Albert's dead, and he's haunting the place. Right, okay. And it transpires that Harold killed Albert many years ago and ran away to South America. And so, like 30 years later, he's come back, and Albert is haunting the place. Right. And so then there's loads of flashbacks where it's telling stories from their life, but all new material, not just recycling stuff from the shows. It kind of all wraps up in a kind of nice way. I don't know exactly what happens, but I suspect that we don't find out that Harold brutally murdered his father in cold blood. I suspect there was something more to it than that. And it's also, I've heard it said, like, this is a definite end to the Steptoe story. So my guess is that Harold dies at the end as well. And like they sort of like, they're dead together, haunting Steptoe Yard or something.
He's stuck there with him for the rest of time.
Yeah. Which it sounds like a really nice kind of just finish to it. I saw a clip of it. I found YouTube, there's like just a couple of clips, because it's not been released on DVD or anything. Mm-hmm. A few minutes of it, and the actors do a really good job imbuing the characters that we know and love, but not trying too hard just to do an impression. And I want to compare and contrast that to something else that was made in 2016. I don't know if you know about this, but the BBC did a sort of lost episodes of comedy thing where they remade some old comedy stuff. Yes.
They made a lot of remade some Hancocks, didn't they?
They did a load of Hancocks for radio, which were like lost episodes that didn't exist anymore, with Kevin McNally, and then they did for TV as well.
For TV, yes, I've seen the Hancock one.
Oh yeah, they did a Steptoe Son one as well, and it's a remake of an episode called A Winter's Tale, and it's basically word for word. The script is exactly the same. And because of that, you can really see how much performance matters, because this is one of the worst things I've ever watched. It really is terrible. It's worth seeing just to
shame
believe
the actors,
it.
Then who play the characters?
I won't shame them, because I don't know their names, to be perfectly honest with you, because they're not like famous known actors.
Right. Okay.
And I don't know how much to blame them. It feels like it's really lacking direction, to the point where I looked up the director to see like, who the hell is this? And he's got a long pedigree of sitcom directing for like 20 years. So, I don't know. I mean, the guy playing Harold particularly is just at one level constantly. There's no change in what you do at all. And it's just like he's angry all the time. And so you don't get any interplay between the characters. The guy playing Albert is a bit better, I think, and it does feel a little bit kind of just doing an impression, I don't know, it just doesn't work.
It must be impossible not to. Can you imagine being told you're playing Albert Steptoe and you're just going to do an impression?
Yeah. it's hard. And like I say, I think Wilford Bramble, just his face and his voice and what he could do with it was just, he was a grotesque. It's hard to mimic that. And the fact that he's like 5'6" or something and so skinny, it all just adds to that character and the like little and large dynamic between them and all that. You can't fake that. It's just perfectly cast. But this remake they did in 2016, it's worth seeing because you can't believe it could be done that badly. And also, they show the audience. So there's definitely a studio audience there.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they were just completely silent or what, because the laughter that they put on the thing is canned laughter, and not good canned laughter either.
Really?
And it loses so much because of that. Like, it's just because... I can't state how bad it is. It was unbelievable. To say it's exactly the same script. Although, a couple of interesting notes about exactly the same script. I was watching for a couple of things because there was a bit where Albert is flicking through a magazine and he's looking for something.
Yeah.
And in the original version, he's like looking for it a little bit too long. And Harold kind of goes, come on, it's somewhere in the middle there. And then he finds it and he does it.
Yeah.
That's not in the new bit. I don't think that was in the script. I think that was him.
That was just, he'd forgotten his line.
Yeah. And there's also a bit where Albert says something about, we're the only white people in the street anymore, which he says all the time, stuff like that. And not in the remake, but in the original, Harold says, that's because you drove them away. So I don't know if that's just Harry H. Corbett throwing his own little bit into that. Because...
Well, if you said Galton and Simpson were very forensic with their scripts, would they be allowed to improvise like that?
I mean, it might have just come through in rehearsal and were given the okay, you know. But no, it seems like generally they weren't encouraged to improvise.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't. So just to kind of wrap up the whole thing, you know, Harry H. Corbett died when he was only 57 of a heart attack. He'd already had a heart attack before that. It's
So was that just hard living? I know we've talked about Wilford Bramble being the drinker, but was he a smoker? And...
I think he smoked like 100 cigarettes a day. Yeah, okay. He was a heavy smoker. Yeah. The last thing I've seen him in, and I've only seen a little clip of it because I don't think it's available. A sitcom called Grundy, made in 1980, which was about him, and it's only like 5 years after you've seen him in Steptoe, but he's not trying to look younger anymore. He's 55 years old, and he looks it. And it really works for him. I've only seen this one little clip, and who knows if the show is any good, but you can see him aging out, and you can see him playing older characters, and he looks different enough, and he would be different enough to Steptoe that he'd be able to escape from it, I think. Right. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see him in kind of his later years.
So maybe that was finally the time he could escape, when he could become an older man. And
I think that probably could have done it, yeah, and it never happened. Wilford Bramble, I think, was all but retired by that point. He died a few years later. Cancer, I think it was. But, you know, he was a fairly old fella by that point, and he always looked older than he was anyway. So, you know, it's kind of a shame that neither of them escaped it. But some things are so big.
As you said, you know, maybe particularly for Wilford Bramble, but perhaps for both, you know, they were jobbing actors. And, you know, they were set for life, weren't they? It may be in hindsight not what they wanted, but... You get your gig, you know, you get your paying gig, and it's there for 12 years. That's not to be sniffed at.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I mean, they did all right out of it, money-wise. They certainly got a nice house out of it and all that. So
I think, you know, we've tackled one of the sort of defining early sitcoms there. We've talked a lot. We've talked about a lot about the influence that it's had on other things. Yeah. And in other episodes, we're going to talk about lots of different British sitcoms from lots of different eras, but I think we will constantly be comparing, not specifically to Steptoe, but to that first wave of sitcoms and what influence they've had. And I'm pretty sure. Well, I mean, we're not going to cover another episode of Steptoe and Son, but I'm pretty sure this is not the last time we'll talk about it.
No. And I'm looking forward to jumping around all over the place and jumping to the 90s and seeing something else and putting it in a different context and stuff like that. I think we will be referring back to the forebears, yeah, definitely.
So, for people listening, if you want to give us some feedback, that would be very welcome. So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at BritComPod. So let us know what you thought, and thank you for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.